Hello and welcome to Analysis with me, John Rees. One of the largest student demonstrations since 2010 hit the University of London and the headlines yesterday. More than 2,000 students took to the streets after police and private security staff broke up an earlier student occupation at the university last Wednesday. That resulted in numerous arrests and an injunction banning protest on campus. The students were originally protesting over the intended closure of the student union, privatisation of the student loan book, and in solidarity with ongoing labour disputes between the staff and the university management. But now the protests also take in the behaviour of the police and the ban on protest at the university. Well, we invited a member of the university management to join us, but they declined. But we do have with us Sam Dathi, who's the organiser of the Student Assembly Against Austerity, Feyzi Ismail, who's a lecturer in development studies at the School of Oriental and African Studies, Maham Hashmi Khan, a sabbatical officer at SOAS Student Union, and Arib Ullah, who's Vice President of Academic Affairs at King's College London. But before we get into the discussion, here's Emmanuel Nunes with this report.
Thousands of students gathered yesterday in front of the University of London Union. The university's administration wants to close the union next year and replace it with an unelected organisation. The decision has caused anger between students who want to be able to elect their own representatives. They also wanted to make clear their opposition to the police presence inside campus 1 week after the violent eviction of student protesters from a campus building. Carrying banners and singing chants, the protesters marched along the streets around the Senate. At the front gate, there was a message for them, a copy of the court order that prohibits all occupational protest on campus for 6 months and threatens those who violate the order with jail time. Obviously, it was too late, and soon the demonstrators showed no doors or gates were going to stop them.
Guys, climb the fence!
Let's do it. I'm on it as well.
Once the Senate's back gate was opened, students stormed into campus. In front of the SOAS building, many decided to defy the university's recent ban on sit-in protests on its campuses. But while the students were peacefully protesting, a small group of anarchists carrying flags and with their faces covered decided to take the fight a few steps further. After leaving behind a burning bin and a couple of messages, some anarchists tried to force the entry into the Senate's main building. The protest was then taken back to the streets, and despite no police officer was seen while the demonstrators were inside the campus, things changed once they strolled down the main streets. In front of the Royal Courts of Justice, several police vans were stopped by the protesters, but the police never reacted. Despite some tension moments in front of number 10 Downing Street and the Houses of Parliament, there are no reports of incidents between the protesters and the police.
Well, unlike some protests, there are a whole number of different issues that have brought the students onto the street. So let's see in this first part of the discussion whether we can unpack what some of those issues are. Sam, one of the issues is about the closure of the student union. Now, London University is a collegiate university. There are different colleges all over the city. But the University of London Union is the kind of central union. And that's what's being threatened with closure, isn't it?
It is, yes, and I think the main reason for that is that for years the University of London Union has been a real hub of resistance. It's a very radical union, and it's organised a number of really inspiring demonstrations over the last few years. And the management don't like that. They don't like a unruly union which actually tries to oppose its policies, its the creeping privatization and austerity and its infringement on democracy in campuses. So I think this is an attempt, a very cynical attempt to crack down on one very important hub of democracy and activism in our campuses.
Arif, do you read it like that? I mean, ULU was the University of London Union, the Central Union, was very instrumental in the student protests in 2010. Do you think it is, as Sam's suggesting, essentially a political move?
I mean, it could be argued as being a political move, yes, considering the fact that, as Sam has mentioned, it has been a hub of activism for the last few decades. Like we can talk about, for example, Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela was made the honorary president of the University of London Union as well. It's also been a hub for Palestine activism over the years. I think the University of London Union was the first few unions in the country to pass a boycott, divestment and sanction motion as well, and that sent ripples across the country as well, and it did create a domino effect where a lot of other unions adopted that. So you could argue it as being a managerial decision to kind of clamp down on activism to a large degree, yes.
Feyzi, another aspect of this, I mean, you're on the staff side of both SOAS and UCL. Another aspect of this has been solidarity with an ongoing labour dispute. Just tell us a little bit about what that involves.
So the lecturers have been on strike twice in the past month. Basically they've been offered a 1% pay rise over the last 4 years, which is effectively, with inflation, a 13% pay cut. And so they've gotten together through the union and have called 2 one-day strikes, one on the 31st of October and one just recently on the 3rd of December. And students came out partly, as you say, in solidarity with that strike. And I think, you know, lots of people have made comparisons to the 2010 student movement, and I think one of the main differences, at least between then and now, is the staff involvement and the real levels of solidarity that have been shown, you know, between staff and students. And you know, after the students occupied, and we've seen this police brutality, a lot of the staff have been saying now we need to show solidarity with the students.
And that's brought quite a sort of a different dynamic in the mood of the demonstrations, the fact that the staff are actively involved in a dispute at the same time?
Absolutely. I mean, if we compare to 2010, it took a few days, if not a few weeks, for the staff to get involved. They did get involved in the end, in the sense of, you know, signing petitions and even coming out on the demonstrations to some extent. This is different, I think. There's a lot more staff involvement, and there wasn't that period of sort of skepticism or kind of, keeping on the sidelines really for the first few days. They were outraged at the level of police brutality and even just the presence of police on campus. You know, morally, ethically, legally, any way you cut it, this is unacceptable to both staff and students.
Maham, and the other thing that's often mentioned is this selling off of the student loan book, which, you know, perhaps for viewers who aren't familiar with what this is, there was a government system set up to give students loans that they could get through college. That put them in a considerable amount of debt, and that debt is now being sold off by the government to private companies. Is that the gist of it?
Yes, first of all, I'd like to I'm not a sabbatical at the SOAS Students' Union. I'm a part-time officer at ULU. What we're seeing is part of a process of privatization and marketization of our education. So the closure of ULU is part of that process, wherein we become customers of a service provided by the university rather than active members of a community that can self-organize and self-regulate in some ways. And then the sell-off of the student debt book is another part of this austerity, kind of the Tories' plan to, lower the debt, the national debt, which they're doing by selling our student loans to private companies and putting us in a situation where we had initially signed a contract with the student loans company, which would be something that was regulated by the government, and now you're giving it in the hands of private companies who might then sell it off to other private companies. And at one point, we become basically slaves to a system that initially we had a say in because it was a democratic system that the government was running, and now it's just run by private companies. We don't know. So now they're selling it off, and then what's the next step? Will they come knocking on our doors with debt collectors? You know, it was always meant to be something that we paid off through taxation. What's going to happen next? We don't know.
Sam, so that's a sort of a cluster of the original issues that motivated students. There was last week there was an occupation of Senate House, and that the way that was dealt with by the university authorities really accelerated the whole dispute, didn't it? Because the police were sent in. People may have seen on some other news bulletins that broke it up with considerable force.
That's right, yeah. I mean, so the two of the main factors which has led to this resurgence in the student movement has been the industrial disputes of higher education staff setting off the student debt. But now there's been a new dimension. These issues have led to protests, and the protests have been quite repressively cracked down upon. And a protest that Maham and I were involved in was the occupation of Senate House back on the 4th of December, I think it was. You know, this is like the holy grail of forums to occupy. It's the nerve centre of management in London, in Bloomsbury. And I don't think it's ever been occupied, but we managed to occupy it and hold the space for 5 or 6 hours before management, Balfour Beatty, security guards, several of them came in with a host of police officers, burst through the barricades, came through the corridor, and were just dragging students, kicking and screaming down the corridor, using violence. I've never seen anything like it. I mean, they didn't even get a possession order. Every occupation I've ever been involved in, the process has been, they leave it a few days, they get a possession order, and then you kind of leave. And that's always been the way that they do it. Now they don't bother with that. They just engage in self-help. Because the management now see genuine resistance, not, you know, just kind of placid, pointless occupations and protests, but genuine resistance that can actually challenge this creeping privatization, this austerity program and all the rest of it. So I think we're going to see a lot more self-help, a lot more police repression in the weeks and months to come. But, you know, it's backfired on the police and management because yesterday there was a protest, cops off campus, and I've never seen that kind of radicalism really since 2010. Thousands of students marching through Bloomsbury, real passion, real anger, and it was a really, really inspiring day. And I think
we'll come on to the protest in a minute. But first of all, just on as we're dealing with the sort of causes of it, there's the initial causes, then there's the police reaction, but also now, I mean, we said in the intro that the university have got an injunction to ban protests. It's actually a ban on further occupation. Is that right, Arib?
Yeah, so the actual injunction the University of London filed for states that you're not allowed to conduct occupational protests, i.e. occupations as well. One other factor that I think you forgot, that has been forgotten, that was the reason for why individuals did, an independent network of students did occupy Senate House was because of the pay conditions that were given to the cleaners of the...
which is a very long-running dispute.
Yeah, so that was part of the Three Coasters campaign, which called for three things, correct me if I'm wrong, which was the London living wage...
sick pay, holidays and pensions.
Sick pay, holiday and pension as well. And I think the most amazing part of what happened yesterday was the fact that it wasn't just lecturers and staff who joined us, it was also the cleaners, the people who are often perceived as being invisible. I think it was the cleaners who actually came up to the activists and said, thank you for campaigning for us, because before this, we used to always be invisible. And I think this has created an amazing level of solidarity with students who, majority of them potentially are middle class, would have no inkling or any relation to these cleaners as well. And I think this is something special that we're witnessing, or actually witnessing a movement forming here as well. And I think that's something we need to take into account.
Can I just add a very quick point? I mean, it's worth saying that yesterday at the protest, students actually intentionally breached the occupational injunction by having a sit-in outside the Service main building.
So, Feyzi, I mean, in many ways, what's drawing all this together is a response to austerity and privatisation. I mean, all these things that we've touched on, that's the common theme, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's the experience of everyone, you know, from lecturers to cleaners to students. This is, and also people are saying, you know, at a prestigious university, how can we not pay cleaners? I mean, sick pay, holiday, basic things, pensions. So I think there's a lot of, there's a lot of outrage around that. And I think, you know, more and more there's a sort of realization we have to fight this on a collective level. You know, this isn't just, we can't just fight this, you know, lecturers on their own, you know, cleaners on their own, students on their own. It's a problem across higher education and across the country. But then, I mean, this is happening across other sectors in the country as well. So, in a sense, I think we do need to then broaden it out and try and create this this movement against austerity really.
So, Maham, I mean, there's a sort of coalition within the university. Is it looking now to sort of broader support in the in the society as a whole? It's a whole number of different campaigns going on at the moment.
I think so. I mean, students have been involved in a lot of local campaigns as well since 2010, and I think everything links in. We're not a bubble that lives on campus only. We live in communities. Our communities are getting, NHS is being privatized. Our fire services, fire stations are being closed, and students have been involved in every step of the way. And what we're seeing now is students like bringing those themes into universities and like taking the student protests out into the different campaigns against austerity.
Arib, I mean, you're also involved with the Federation of Student Islamic Societies. Do you think that there's a case here, because many of members of that society will come from some of the poorest families in the society? Do you think there is a strong case for making links beyond the student movement now into?
Well, there's no denying that. I mean, what we witnessed yesterday in regards to the Cops of Campus demonstration was a collective of students. There was no hierarchy. It was very organic. Some would call it organic, others would call it unorganised. But one thing that was really inspiring, for example, I'm from the area of Tottenham where Mark Duggan was shot, was thousands of students walking down Holborn High Street towards the Royal Courts of Justice, chanting who killed Mark Duggan, the police killed Mark Duggan.
Where the inquiry is taking place at the moment.
Where the inquest is taking place. And this level of solidarity that was shown was truly inspiring, especially for someone like myself who lives in an ethnicity area which has been affected by the issues regarding the execution of Mark Duggan. And is that connection that was drawn between what was the struggle that we're facing as students to the local communities. And this could potentially be the beginning of that linkage between showing solidarity with not just student issues, but also issues impacting some of the most vulnerable within society. So I do agree. I think there is a genuine case for that connection with the Muslim community overall.
Okay, well, that's where we're going to have to leave it for the first part of the show, where we've been looking at the background to and the causes of new student unrest. But rejoin us after the break, because we'll be talking about the conduct of yesterday's demonstration and about the future for the movement.